You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. A quick warning, this next story does include discussion of suicide. On August 10th, 2018, Richard Russell stole a Horizon Air Bombardier Q400 aircraft from SeaTac.
Hey, I found myself in a bit of a predicament. I'm in the air right now and just kind of soaring around.
449, are you not supposed to be on that aircraft?
Yeah. So what's a good frequency to talk to other people?
Did you just take off?
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to be on that aircraft?
No.
The 28-year-old was a ground service agent with no pilot's license. In fact, he had never piloted a plane before.
Just flying the plane around, do you seem comfortable with that?
Oh, hell yeah, it's a blast, man. I played video games before, so I know what I'm doing a little bit.
After about 70 minutes in the sky, Russell crashed into Ketron Island in South Puget Sound and died. The story quickly made national headlines. On the internet, people called him the Sky King. His loved ones called him Beebo.
It may seem difficult for those watching at home to believe, but Beebo was a warm, compassionate man. It is impossible to encompass who he was in a press release. He was a faithful husband, a loving son, and a good friend.
A new film tells Beebo's story through the eyes of his friends and family who opened up for the first time since that 2018 statement. Patricia Gillespie is a documentary filmmaker and the director of Sky King, which you can now stream on Hulu. Trish, thank you so much for being here on KUOW.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So for people who might not remember the details of what happened to Richard or Beebo, can you just take us back to that day in August in 2018? He's a ground service agent for Horizon Air, which is a part of Alaska. He has clearance to be there in a secure area, but certainly not to fly a plane. And the way that he actually ends up getting in and taking off is pretty remarkable from the start. Can you just tell us what happened?
Yeah, for sure. So he clocked into work wearing a Sky's No Limit t-shirt and went right past security as he normally would. They have their own security area that lets him into more sensitive areas of the airport for the job he did. And he was a tug operator. That was part of his duties as a ground service agent. And he pulled up a tug, this little vehicle that moves the airplane into position, and went into the cargo area and took a plane that was awaiting maintenance and was done flying for the day. It was waiting for fuel and for people to check it out. And he just dragged it right out there and took off. And no one noticed. I mean, he was a sight you saw on that tarmac, and he was in his vest, and he looked like he was just doing his job. And by the time he was moving, there wasn't much anyone else could do.
And what happens once he's in the sky? I mean, pretty immediately, there are air traffic controllers who are trying to alert the FAA, right? And there's kind of a scramble of what to do here. What's the reaction like on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying. We live in a post 9/11 America, right? When a plane takes off that's not supposed to be in the sky, I think we're all pretty scared. The FAA, the folks that were working that day were incredible professionals and managed and triaged the situation very quickly. But there was a period of time where they couldn't really get in touch with him, or they weren't really sure who he was or what he was doing. And you see that in the film. And it's a really tense few minutes there. But then all of a sudden his voice sort of breaks the airwaves, and he does not sound like the kind of guy who would hijack a plane. He's really friendly. He's assuring people he doesn't want to hurt them. He's cracking jokes. And so you're sort of in this situation, if you're in the FAA or you're a listener on the ground, really trying to square the terrifying thing this man has done with the sort of familiarity and likability you're hearing over the airwaves.
449, stand by. I'm getting a frequency for you.
Hey, copy that. I appreciate it. Hey, any idea if a Dash 8 Q400 can do a barrel roll?
Yeah, sense of humor.
Yeah.
He's funny.
Yeah.
I don't want to, step on, people should watch the film to, see the blow by blow of how the air traffic controllers are trying to get information from him. They try to offer, a pilot gets on the line to try to see if they can help him land. He's going cruising kind of around Rainier. He goes over to the Olympics. He's really taking in the sights. And slowly you start to hear sort of more, I guess, nihilism is what I would say, or some kind of a hopelessness, enter the voice. The fuel is ticking down. And Can you remind people, how does his flight come to an end?
Throughout the flight, I think there are a lot of questions about what he's going to do, what his motivations are, and the film unpacks a lot of that. But in the end, he does indeed crash the plane, and he does so intentionally. In the report of the aircraft incident, it uses the phrase controlled descent. So he meant to crash, and he committed suicide. And I think that, as you're alluding to, you really do hear over the course of this him go from the adrenaline of first taking off to, sort of trying to talk about some of the issues he's had to really sort of saying goodbye. And I think that's why it was so important for us to include his family rather than the stuff that had been online, because we wanted to be able to tell the story of what had happened, but not glorify suicide, which I think some of the stories that were told around this, unfortunately, intentionally or unintentionally did. And so it was important for us to always foreground the family in this and show that, when somebody does choose to end their life, they might feel like they're ending the pain, but they're really just passing it on to the people that love them the most.
You spoke with Beebo's mother, his siblings. He has 2 sets of twin siblings, one of his colleagues at work, one of his best friends from high school and college. Why did you decide to take this on as a project, first of all? And then I'd love to hear what it was like approaching them to participate in this.
Yeah, I think for me, I heard this story for the first time around the time it was happening. Like a lot of people, I heard little snippets on social media, but I also recognized you weren't hearing the complete recordings. And I heard something in his voice that I grew up working class as well. And there's something in his voice that just really reminded me of the guys I grew up with and some of the gals too. And I wanted more context for what he was saying, because some of it was disturbing, some of it was unusually kind. I needed to know how this man got there. And I knew that a lot was missing from the narrative because his family hadn't spoken. And I knew that to find those pieces of the story, we had to talk to them. And so really it started with me writing his mom letters. I mean, pretty long letters. And we started writing back and forth a little bit. And then we started talking on the phone. And we talked now and again for about a year and a half, 2 years, before she decided that, yeah, this was the time she was ready and she wanted to make a film. And then once we had Karen, his mom's buy-in, the rest of the family really followed suit, and that filled out a lot of the story for us.
And for you, you spoke a little bit about this just now, saying that you grew up working class, but this, in the course of the film, you realize it does become kind of a contemplation of class and the struggle of working class people. Why did that speak to you?
I mean, I think it came naturally out of the story. I had a sense that it was there, right? Because I heard some common experience, right? So I'm like, this has something to do with class. And when I saw it get sensationalized and politicized, I noticed a class narrative was distinctly missing. So it was definitely something I was curious about, but I wasn't sure where the story would take me, right? He says a few controversial things in the air, and I knew I had to dig into what he meant and why he said those things. And I knew it was possible I could find ugly things, or possible I could find something that better contextualized or explained those statements. And what I found was, by politicizing this and sensationalizing this, both in mainstream media and on social media, we'd missed this human narrative, and we missed a really important class narrative about what was going on with him at work, about what was going on with the pressure he felt as a man to provide and to be strong and be tough. And we miss those things when we're judgmental rather than curious. When we hear something and decide this fits our narrative this way, or we hear something and decide this guy's a good guy or a bad guy, or he's a terrorist or he's a hero, and we don't sort of say, okay, well, how, why, who, I think it's also the fact that we're from a similar background is like part of the reason why we were able to talk to each other so frankly and able to tell this story together, which is really how I see it. I think his family's done an incredibly brave thing in confronting these recordings and reliving this story. And they've done it to try to help people, and I think it was important that we were all on the same page about that. And in many ways, culturally on the same page about what Beebo's experience as a working person was.
He's from Wasilla, Alaska. He's successful in high school, well-liked, but he has a difficult childhood because his dad is an alcoholic and there's abuse in the home. His mom has to leave and raise 5 kids by herself, and she's still a working lady. And it's really difficult to see his brothers and his sisters today grapple with, even if you are sad as a man, you know, who we are, how we grew up, if you are struggling with mental health issues, you can't be asking for counseling. Like, that just would be way too, it would seem weak, basically, is what they're saying. And I wonder how those conversations went with you and the family about mental health and the ways that Beebo was struggling silently in many ways.
I think that was one of those things when I talk about us coming from the same background and it making this easier or make sense to work together on telling this story. Because yes, there's this idea of being weak or feminized if you're a guy asking for help. There's also an issue of practical access, right? Like, health insurance is expensive, therapy is expensive. You also have to probably be available during business hours, Monday through Friday, which isn't the reality for working class people. And then there's this third thing I think we talk about even less, which is if you grow up either on the jagged edge of the middle class or the working class or poor, social capital becomes your capital rather than financial capital. You are cooperating with people to get things done. You are having to work together as a team. It's part of the culture. It's part of how you get your needs met. And everybody is dealing with a lot. Everybody's dealing with limited resources. Everybody's dealing with problems. And there's a culture where, man or woman, you do not want to bother others with your problem, that you feel your pain is a burden to other people, and that the kind thing to do is suffer quietly. And this is really drilled into us in a lot of ways, in particular, but not exclusively men. I was taught this way too. My husband, who's not from the States, but grew up in Cuba, was taught this way, right? Like, there's this culture of, like, if you're a working person, you have issues meeting your needs, do not bother other people. And I think there was an element of that too. And I think being able to discuss these things with some level of mutual understanding helped them open up. And it was like such a privilege for me. His brother Danny is like a man's man. He's got, like, you see him in the movie with the AR-15, and he's like a tough guy, and he like does dip, and, like, you know, he's just like a dude. And being able to do his interview, and at the end of it, we're sitting there and he's like crying, and he should be crying, and it's beautiful, and it's such a relief. It's like this sigh that I'm like, yeah, you should have space to do this. Those were really, although they were tragic, they were really special moments in making this film, because I feel like just creating a space for these conversations is so vital right now.
So just to kind of give people a fuller picture of when we talk about the class issue and the plight of the working class that you're addressing here in the film, Beebo or Richard is feeling a sense of financial despair. I mean, what was going on with him? He was worried about his pay. He was worried about supporting his wife, right? That's what you learned by talking with his family and friends.
I think that the American dream has not caught up with the reality of the American economy. And I think that's a pressure that a lot of working people feel, again, in particular men, in particular working class men, because there's this idea of the male provider. And it can make guys feel like failures, right? If you're told you're supposed to be able to make all this money and succeed, and if you just bootstrap your way up, and if you just work hard, you'll be a success with the 2 cars in the driveway and the white picket fence. And realistically, like, you just need 2 incomes now. You're probably not going to have a white picket fence. You're probably going to be renting, and it's maybe 1 car. Of course, I'll never know what exactly was in Beebo's mind. No one will. He's gone. He can't tell us. But I think if you really listen to that call and you listen to these stories, you'll see that economic reality and the reality of how success has become more and more unattainable for working people, that was weighing heavily on him.
So one of the things that was really sensationalized online, and we've kind of gestured at it, but maybe we could just directly talk about it, was something that Beebo said.
Hey, you think if I land this successfully, Alaska will give me a job as a pilot?
I think they would give you a job doing anything if you could pull this off.
Yeah, right. Nah, I'm a white guy.
And I think that a lot of people picked this up as some sort of anti-woke or, anti-DEI rallying cry. And it was part of the reason that Beebo's legend grew online. And I was really struck by the family's seeming discomfort, but also frustration with the way that it had been spun and politicized. I was also really struck by Beebo's colleague, who's Black, who spoke with you, just saying in such a succinct way, basically, Beebo was up for a promotion. He didn't get it. I don't think it was because he was white, And then he said something that will stick with me. He said, white doesn't wash away class. And he's making the point, basically, that Beebo's struggles in the workplace, he feels, were because they saw him as white trash, in so many words. What did you feel when you were having that conversation? And it seemed like that interview kind of unlocked something in the movie.
Yeah, there's so much. There's so much to say about this. But here's the thing. When I first heard that audio, I went, oh, man, darn. This guy was making really clear points. He was really likable. And this line is a little concerning. And what am I going to find when I dig deeper, right? And I had to be open to the fact that maybe I would find, it was very possible I would find something problematic or someone who did feel a lot of resentment about being a white man in the workforce on the basis of race. That was possible. But I thought even if that was what I found, it does need to be explored because that's a driving cultural factor in our world today and influences a lot about politics and how we live our lives. But I was fascinated to discover that a lot of information that showed me that this line did not, in fact, point to that. It pointed to a very specific event at work that he had told numerous people about. That, as you say, you'll have to see Andreas unpack it in the film. But it really pointed toward the issue of working class solidarity or working class people coming together to improve their conditions and how sometimes white grievance is weaponized in order to prevent that. And when we went and politicized this, the far right, the fringes of the far right saying, look at our white nationalist hero, or the fringe of the far left saying, this guy's a terrorist, don't listen to a word he says, we miss this very important human story at the center, and we miss a really important class story that affects the average American, regardless of class, race, gender, whatever. That to me was like a real watershed moment in making this. I also think it was important to show his family wanted that corrected. They did not want the alt-right selling T-shirts and profiting off him when his ideology did not match that whatsoever. But they also felt afraid to say anything about it because the discourse is such that even to go out and talk about this, you might catch yourself in the crosshairs or somebody might think the wrong thing or, find you guilty by association. If I were to be totally honest with you, there were times making this film where I say, I hope everybody gives me the benefit of the doubt while I do this and they don't think I'm a bad person or an apologist. And we're so polarized as a country right now. It's hard sometimes to, again, stop and be curious rather than judgmental. There's like a rush that we should all be taking a stand very quickly. And I think good journalism tries to stay a little empty, a little blank, just collect and let a truth emerge. And that's how you do get to the deeper stories.
I think there's a way that, certain phrases or code words or ideas that are brought up, people use them as shorthand to slot you into a certain category as, and, he brought up, he said this line, and so therefore he's probably an alt-right racist guy, and therefore I'm not going to be as curious about what actually is behind that and then what actually is the story here. And that can be something we fall into, I think, especially today's day and age on social media. It's like you just kind of need those little shortcuts to put people in boxes in order to survive. And it really cuts short curiosity, and it can be a real obstacle. But I think your storytelling, obviously digs beyond that. Just before we go, Patricia, is there anything that you want people to walk away from this film with? I mean, anything we haven't touched on, or when you hear that somebody's going to watch it, what do you hope they take away?
First and foremost, I hope this film encourages people to call their buddy and ask, hey, man, are you okay? I want the real answer. Or maybe when they're asked that question, answer a bit more honestly, or even say, you know what, I do have to prioritize mental health. I do have to sign up for this or call my social worker or get my insurance or invest in some therapy before it's too late. I hope that the film does that. And I know that the family was so brave in coming forward because that's the legacy they want for Beebo as well. And then also, germane to the other points we were talking about, I think this is a film that people can view across the political spectrum. And I hope that it sparks a little moment of, hey, maybe I have more in common with these people that I don't necessarily agree with on everything, but we are facing the same issue at work. We are facing the same issue with the economy. We are facing the same issue because there are things that even if we disagree on big, important stuff, there are things that are really affecting our lives that we can agree on, that we can work together to solve. And I think we're really at a point where we have to make a choice about that as Americans. And I think this story points toward that a bit. And yeah, I hope working people take that away from it and take a bit of a sense of identity and pride in their identity as workers from it too.
The documentary is called Sky King. It is available on Hulu now. It is a really fascinating watch, especially if you were in the Seattle area or in Western Washington when that was happening, and just how terrifying and transfixed many of us were by the news and by watching Beebo or Richard in the sky, and hoping that things would resolve and not really getting a chance to know more, because again, the family only opened up for the first time past that statement with you, Patricia Gillespie, documentary filmmaker and the creative force behind Sky King. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.